The stereotype of a witch, wearing a tall pointed black hat and carrying a broomstick, seems to only come from movies and fiction. In history, there is no substantial evidence that this was ever the case. Witches, especially in Europe, dressed as any other person would. In fact, if you consider the horror of the European witch hunts and trials, it would stand to reason that a witch would not want to stand out from the crowd. But on occasion, these common hats, in the right hands, could manifest great power. This was discovered by a young Scottish traveller in the tale of the witch's cap. One wild and stormy night in the land of Kintyre in Argyll, a traveller struggled through the storm. It was now pitch dark, and as the wind and rain became more ferocious, the man admitted to himself that he was lost. It was then he spotted the dim light in the distance, coming through the window of a small cottage. He thought that no one would refuse him shelter in this weather, and the Highlanders have always been very hospitable to travellers. Surely he would be granted a bed for the night. As the traveller neared the hut, he could smell the peat fire burning, and his heart leapt at the thought of a warm fire to lay beside. Reaching the hut, he knocked sharply at the door and was beckoned inside by an old crackling voice. On entering, he saw a strange old woman crouched beside the fire. Her eyes seemed to narrow. "And who might you be?" she demanded. "Good evening," the man replied politely. "I'm a traveller. I seem to have gotten lost in the storm, and I wish to claim the right of Highland hospitality and a seat by your fire." The old woman did not seem pleased by this request. "I live alone," she said in an unfriendly voice. "I do not wish for visitors, and I am sure the shepherd down the glen will shelter you. It's no more than a mile from here." The traveller, already seated in front of the fire, laughed. "A mile, you say? That's too far, and I can go no further tonight. And I'm practically asleep here anyway. I will not bother you." Then the arrogant man lay down before the fire and closed his eyes. The woman looked angrily at the man, but kept her cool and said nothing. Later that night, there came a light scratch at the door. "Elsbeth, Elsbeth, are you there?" The traveller was awakened by the sound and quickly inquired, "What's going on?" "Nothing," snapped the old woman. "Go back to sleep." The man tried to do as he was told, but something did not sit right with him, and so through half-closed eyes, he watched as two other old women crept into the room to join his reluctant host. The three women began to whisper in the corner, and from time to time, they would take it in turns to throw spiteful glances in his direction. It was only now that the man began to fear for his life. Perhaps he had made a horrible mistake, and these strange women may be witches. He lay perfectly still and simulated a deep sleep as he strained to hear the three. After some time, one of the women spoke a little louder. "He's fast asleep now. Let us be off." Despite the horrendous weather, all of the women donned heavy travelling robes. Then the woman known as Elsbeth withdrew from her pocket a white cap. She pulled the cap over her thinning grey hair, and in a clear voice she said, "Off to Carlisle." The woman began rising into the air, and then shot out of the hut with a terrific speed, going through the open smoke hole in the roof. The second woman pulled on her white cap, and with the words "off to Carlisle," she repeated the first woman's magical feat. But as the third woman pulled her white cap from a pocket, the traveller sprang up and snatched the cap from the woman's hands. She screamed loudly as the man put the cap on his head and called the words, "Off to Carlisle." He too then shot out of the smoke hole, leaving the enraged woman alone in the hut. As the man flew through the air, he could see the land beneath him hurtling by. He passed the border and began to slow near the English town of Carlisle. There he flew down a chimney and appeared in the cellar of a house. The young traveller, still a little stunned after his incredible journey, couldn't believe his eyes. All around him were bottles and barrels of beer and wine. The two women, who he now knew to be witches of some sort, were happily drinking their fill of the wine. It would seem this cellar and its delightful drinks were well known to the pair. They were enjoying themselves so much they didn't even notice the third woman had not arrived. The man, trying as he could to stay out of their sight, followed their example and began to drink. After some time, the now drunk witches stumbled towards the fireplace in the cellar, and donning their white caps again, they slurred, "Off to Argyll." The pair again began to float, and then shot up the chimney and out into the night sky. The man thought he had better follow them, but searching for his borrowed cap, he found it was nowhere to be seen. Frantically, he began tearing his way through the cellar searching for it. But to his horror it was gone, and what's more, the man could hear footsteps heading to the cellar. During his wild drunken search, he must have made a sizable noise, and the owner of the cellar ran to see what was happening. Unfortunately for the traveller, he was caught red-handed, sitting in the cellar surrounded by empty bottles. He was roughly dragged by the owner of the cellar to the local authorities. The owner told of how he found the thief in his cellar, drunk on his wine. And not only that, wine had been going missing from the cellar on a near weekly basis over the last few months, and now he finally had the perpetrator. The man was quickly tried for multiple accounts of breaking and entering and theft. The local judge did not look kindly on the man. He was a Scotsman who had come over the border and spent his time stealing and harassing the people of Carlisle. The traveller tried to plead his case. He told of the caps and the witches, but this only made things worse, since he had happily admitted to being in the company of the witches, which in itself was punishable by death at the time. The judge told the man, "You are fortunate, but no one believes this outrageous tale. For if they did, you would have been burned alive for witchcraft." The judge continued, "Consider yourself lucky that you have only been condemned to hang." Then and there, the man was sentenced to death. The day of the execution arrived, and the man, prodded along by the town guards, mournfully climbed the wooden steps to the gallows. A large crowd had gathered, hearing the rumours that a man involved in witchcraft would hang today. As the traveller stood before the crowd and the executioner, contemplating his fate, an icy cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He reached into his pocket for a handkerchief, ready to wipe the perspiration away, but as he brought it out, he realised it was the witch's white cap. Suddenly, some faint hope had returned. He pleaded with the executioner for one last request. The man said, "My final request of this world is to die wearing my white cap." The executioner was puzzled at this request, but granted the soon-to-die man his strange boon. As the cap was placed on the man's head, he called in a loud voice, "Off to Argyll!" And before the executioner had time to think, the man began to float away. Cries and screams issued forth from the astonished crowd, and the man shot into the sky and disappeared. In no time at all, the man landed back in Scotland, in the land of Argyll, inside the witch's house. Luckily, there was no one there at the time, and the traveller threw down the white cap and ran from the hut. Never again did he journey to Argyll, and never again did he involve himself with witchcraft. And it is my guess that he never again lodged at a house where he was unwelcome. Thank you for listening.